We're having a lot more conversations about menstruation, which is good. There are more product choices and options and materials, which is great. But one of the things we keep hearing is that people who menstruate are not taught really the basic fundamentals of what they should know. Is there sort of a menstruation 101 for people who are listening that you can provide?
Look, the standard definition of what's quote unquote normal means a cycle that is on or about every 21 to 35 days. And that's from counting day one of flow to day one of the next flow. The duration of flow is typically less than 8 days. Again, quote, air quotes, normal.
Yes.
And the onset of your period, called menarche, typically starts by the age of 16. And if it doesn't, then that may warrant a little bit of a workup to find out what's going on hormonally. So I think in the scheme of things, those are some general definitions. We usually talk about the menstrual cycle in a couple of phases. So just to make it very simple, there's the menstrual phase, usually day 1 to about day 7 when you're flowing. There is the follicular phase after that, where estrogen rises and you're creating a dominant follicle from which you will ovulate. There is ovulation. And then there's the luteal phase, which is after ovulation, progesterone goes up. And if you don't get pregnant at that time or during ovulation, then menstruation occurs. So it's 4 essential phases. And there, of course, is a lot more complexity to that, but to keep it simple.
One of the things that's interesting about the conversation we're going to have with Danielle Keiser today, who literally lives and breathes all things menstruation from an advocacy standpoint, from a business consulting standpoint, is just really how far the conversation has come. And, as she points out, we've been having these conversations for a long time, but I do feel like so many things in women's health right now, we're at a moment, we have some momentum where, the real change is starting to occur. So let's take a listen.
Welcome to the Business of the V. Hello, friends and colleagues. I'm Dr. Alyssa Dweck.
And I'm Rachel Braun Scherl. Each week, we bring you the most fascinating investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, academics, and healthcare practitioners who are making things happen in women's sexual and reproductive health.
If you are a woman, know a woman, have a business, or care about your V health and wellness, fasten your seatbelts and listen in to another informative and inspiring episode.
We are so excited to have our guest today, Danielle Keiser, who's the managing partner of Madami and a menstrual health expert and also a friend. So we're delighted to have you to talk about all things menstrual health. So one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about on the podcast is how people got from point A to point B. So how do you find yourself truly in the center of the conversation around menstruation and creating worldwide language that people are using? Did you wake up one day and felt like this is what you needed to be doing?
Absolutely not. My journey into the menstrual field actually came through toilets and toilet advocacy. So my first job out of my master's program was working for a nonprofit organization in Berlin called Wash United. And there they really focused on water sanitation and hygiene behavior change, awareness trainings, advocacy, etc., helping support World Toilet Day, encouraging people in countries to be hand washing with soap to prevent diarrheal diseases. And it was in this vein that we saw that there was one underlooked gendered toilet issue that wasn't really getting enough attention. And at that time, it was called menstrual hygiene management, or MHM for short. And so I came on board as a communications and social media and kind of advocacy person and fell head over heels in love with the topic, not even really realizing that menstruation was pretty much the thing that turned me into a feminist working in this field. I never had realized before that periods are the start of a lot of female oppression, and things really change at that time of menarche when the first period comes. And we really see a lot of gender equality indexes change from that point. And so everything kind of hit me real hard. And it's been now, so it's 2013, almost 10 years of working on menstruation. And this journey really started with, helping snowball an awareness movement called Menstrual Hygiene Day, which is celebrated on the 28th of May. And then creating my own nonprofit organization called the Menstrual Health Hub, which was really predicated on the idea that, hey, if we want this to be big and we want menstruation to come out of the hiding place that it's been forever, we need to take a different frame rather than hygiene. And then finally to being a consultant now and expert, and really helping others understand the complexity of menstrual health in its glory beyond the menstrual phase, but then also helping people understand specific industries, product innovations, periods through and through. I'm a big period nerd, if you can't already tell.
So I know certainly I would have loved to have met you when I went into puberty. And Alyssa, you have all the tools to help educate people. Are you finding, since really the dialogue around menstruation has changed so much, and often in positive ways, that we're having more conversations about it and we're more conscious of the language? Are you seeing that in your patients, or do you they still require the same amount of education?
It varies. We always think of menstruation as sort of a window into somebody's health, because there are so many things that occur during, before, after menstruation that really may give key indicators as to whether there may be other medical issues or even emotional or psychological issues occurring. So we kind of consider it to be a real barometer of general health. As far as changes, look, the younger generations, I'd say millennials and younger, are surely more comfortable talking about menstruation. Everybody's got an app. Everybody has their favorite products. We don't call them hygiene products any longer. We call them menstrual products. So I think this is a step definitely in the positive direction. I am curious, with your expertise, what is your thought about the change in all of the menstrual products that are available now? So, for example, the sustainability angle of menstrual cups, or the ease of use, but also concerns about exposure with menstrual panties. Like, do you have specific concerns or, glory for these types of new innovations?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a very pregnant with meaning kind of question as well. So first of all, I think it's really great that there's more than just two choices on the market, because that has been the norm for 50 years or so. And so it's really lovely to see that instead of this or that, there's this and that and that and that and that have finally come to the fore. And you see the menstrual product aisle looking a lot more like the candy bar aisle, which is choices. Sometimes you want fruit, sometimes you want gummies, sometimes you want chocolate, sometimes you want sugar-free. And so all those things are there and starting to really, become a wide variety of choice.
I want to say, Danielle, I've literally never heard that analogy, but
no, me neither. I'm never going to look at the candy aisle the same.
But it's true. I mean, the whole purpose of feminism, I believe, is to ensure that there's choice and you're not persuaded into one direction or the other. So I'm not going to sit here and say that reusable menstrual products are the best. What I think is the best is what's best for the person who's using them. When they are aware of the benefits and the risks of those, then that's the ideal, right? So the menstrual cup itself was actually produced and created before the commercial production of tampons in the 20s or 30s even. And so it's an innovation that's been around for a very long time, but was stopped so that we could continue to buy products like pads and tampons. And so we see something innovative, but I don't know if you can really call it innovative. It just kind of had a grand comeback. And from then, we've been able to see that cups have expanded into discs, which has expanded into all sorts of other technologies that are looking at collection instead of absorption. And kind of, I wouldn't say going back, but if you look at period panties and reusable menstrual pads, they are very similar to what our grandmothers and generations prior to us were using, which is just what we could, which is cloth that we would change regularly. And so it's not, this whole category is not that innovative when you think about these reusable options, except for this insertable, the different nuances and features that we can see happening to menstrual cups and discs based on different shapes and sizes and preferences around vaginal length and whatnot. But I am I'm concerned that there's so much on the market because it's a very unregulated, wild, wild west. At the same time, I'm really happy to see that there's been so much legislative action and advocacy that is talking about how dangerous it is for us to be relying on commercialized products, and that there are links between dioxins and heavy menstrual bleeding, and that we're starting to see links between bleached cotton and the chemicals that go into those products and reproductive health disorders. So I think it's too early to say, concretely, but on the whole, I think we're in a much better place where there's choice for people who menstruate and a lot more information around those choices, because that's to me the ultimate goal.
I did want to follow up on the advocacy piece because I think it's something that's not unique, but very common and important in women's sexual and reproductive health. And just to build on what you were saying before, as many people know, and many people also don't, you can't buy a food product that doesn't have the ingredients listed on it. Mm-hmm. In many states in the US, there's no law or regulation that suggests that someone needs to put on that, the manufacturer needs to put on the package what is in a tampon or something else that you insert vaginally. So for people who are listening, there's so many different routes to advocacy, but one of the ones that's very specific to menstruation is really lobbying so that states require that manufacturers list the ingredients. So yes, going back to your idea of choice, I can decide whether I want to put cotton intravaginally, or I can decide what kind of silicone I want to use on whichever disc I decide to buy. So what's really interesting about the space you occupy is similar to where I think we sit, you bring, incredible understanding of the cycle and the physiology and the emotional impact and the phases. And you also then connect it from a business perspective. So I'm curious, what have you seen looking at both perspectives, bringing the lens that you uniquely have? What do you see as the huge opportunities or the things that we're really expecting to change moving forward?
I just want to comment on the thing that you were saying around advocacy before we move into that. There has been advocacy efforts since the 70s. They were sidelined, ignored. There have been bills in the United States Congress that were continuously put through every single year. And it's only been because of the momentum, because of feminism in general, Me Too, this whole women's empowerment movement, that we've been able to see successes in the menstrual space. So I think it's really important that it's not seen as, happening in a vacuum, but we have, a whole big, robust movement to enable to push those things forward. In terms of opportunities, I'd say that there's a lot happening around hormonal health and people starting to zoom away from the menstrual experience as just the first phase, but really looking at the entire menstrual cycle and tuning into what that actually means for them on a behavioral level, for them on a health level. As you said, Dr. Dweck, like seeing the menstrual cycle as the fifth vital sign, mm-hmm. and being able to, understand menstruation is the response to the main sign, which is ovulation, which has not gotten enough credit, I have to say. Right? You only menstruate because you ovulate. And so what does it mean if you're not menstruating, or what does it mean if your menstruation is extremely painful or extremely heavy? These are all signs that the body is communicating that something might be wrong. And so I think a lot of people are starting to wake up and realize like, oh, wow, intense period pain that puts me out for 3 days isn't normal. Wait, bleeding for 12 days on end isn't normal. No one ever told me this before, but they're hearing about it now from, influencers, Instagram, from their friends, more so than from doctors or from any kind of institutional establishments. And so I'm really excited about what this awakening around one's health will actually mean for the market. Looking at not just menstrual products, but things around ovulation or luteal phase comfort, being able to rest more, looking at things across the cycle and not just the period.
So here's today's hot flash. Menarche, which is defined as the first menstrual period in a female adolescent, typically begins between the ages of 10 and 16, but can occur as early as 9. Yeah, I mean, I notice what I get queried about in the media all the time, which are things, and it comes up over and over and over. Let's talk about the color wheel if your period. What does it mean if your period is this color, that color, or that color? So it is of interest for sure. I think that a lot of the progress you speak about has to do with the apps and all of the data that we're able to collect about people's periods, because this, we all used to have our secret little written calendar with our little codes that would go, maybe I'm dating myself, about when your period's coming or how heavy it is or whatnot. But the truth is now everything is digitized. In fact, many of my patients will bring in charts of what their app may have shown or be able to explain it in much more detail because they have an app. So I think that's been a big progress. I think 2 things that I would just love to pick your brain about more on a medical level. Number one, what is your thought about the 28-day cycle? Because there are so many people that feel this is just a farce that was made up by, I don't know, maybe birth control pill companies, or, that it's just an estimation, but we've gotten so stuck on this concrete number of 28 days. So I really was interested to hear your thought on that.
Yeah. I love this question. So the newest research reveals that an average length of a menstrual cycle is 29.3 days. So if anything, we can start saying 29 instead of 28. But the reality of the matter is that every person is different, and a normal menstrual cycle range is between 21 and 35 days. And so this all comes back to ovulation, right? So the sooner you ovulate, the sooner you menstruate. And so some bodies are big, some are small, some have faster metabolism, some have just different operations. We're not all born the exact same height with the exact same facial structure. And so I think we have to account for that variance, and that 29 days is the average, right? Yeah. So if you're in that range and it's not 16 days, and it's not 40 days on the regular, then I think we're okay. And we need to bust that myth that 29 is the ideal.
Yeah. And the second thing, which actually has a good amount of medical research behind it at this point, is the implication of COVID and COVID vaccinations on menstrual cycles in general. And, for so long, and I'm in practice a very long time, so I feel like I have the right to say, anecdotally, I've noticed that during those first few months or years of COVID, there were issues that people were coming into the office for because they were concerned about their periods being off. And now this has really been solidified with some research, even though they call it transient and mild, there are changes in duration, length, flow, et cetera. What's your thought on that? And do you think it's all related to stress, inflammation, or what else do you have to say about that?
I'm so glad you mentioned this, because we were talking about this back when people first started reporting changes. Yeah. We were told by our partners and our funders to shut up. Yeah. Like, don't talk about this. This is going to get you into the anti-vaccine conversation. We don't want to be affiliated with that. And we're like, hey, this is not about whether to vaccinate or not. This is really about providing correct information and not gaslighting women into saying that their experiences don't matter. If you're someone who is, cycle religious like I am, and you do notice small changes, even if it's a day or two, or stronger cramps or bleeding, that matters. Your experience matters, period. And we were seeing a lot of that denial happening on the side of the medical establishment, whether it was in pharmacies, by doctors themselves, or at, places where the vaccine was being distributed. So I think that's first and foremost. We have to believe women when they say that something is wrong. And second, there has been reported evidence of other vaccines, mainly rubella, that have caused similar experiences to the body. And it's really just an, anti-inflammatory response. Your body is being pummeled with a shot that is, intended to protect it from getting severely sick later. And so this is going to happen with a lot of kind of stress to the body. So we can't really isolate this particular vaccine. We can look at it amongst, a portfolio of other vaccines and the research that's there. So,
and to be clear, this is about vaccination, but also about the actual disease. So this was equally reported in people who had,
which is also stressful to the system, right?
Absolutely.
Getting sick and being under the weather for however many days. Some people had it really bad. Some people had it mildly. I think that, our bodies are very sensitive ecosystems, and we are affected by things, as much as we want to generalize that everybody does this and this is how you should react, that's just not the case. And in these last years, we can all say, not just women, but everyone's experienced an incredible amount of stress with this global pandemic. And one thing we do know for sure is that stress changes the menstrual cycle because it is transitioned
and literally everything else.
Yeah, cortisol, which creates estrogen dominance. And then that also then leads to menstrual changes. So I think once we're finally zooming out to look at a larger picture, which thank goodness, we can start to see all the component pieces kind of working together to see that vaccinations are not bad, women are not crazy. And there's a lot of science still to be learned.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things when we spend a lot of time talking about how the conversation has changed. And, over the past few years, there have been, cataclysmic events that have moved this space forward, like a woman running the London Marathon, free bleeding, or even that concept of free bleeding. Someone posting an Instagram photo where you could see through her sweatpants that she was bleeding, whether or not she meant to have protection or not. And there were people who were horrified, and there are lots of people who were talking about it. When I look at some of the progress, I think of on a totally different tact, like Merriam-Webster said the word of the year was gaslighting. This idea that women have been going into physicians' offices for years and years and years, explaining symptoms, explaining menstrual cramps. Let's just focus on menstruation. Forget about the many, many other diseases where you were also minimized and told that you weren't experiencing what you're experiencing. But I think that brings an awareness, and Alyssa has said this, and you said this about the period being the fifth vital sign. It is not normal to not be able to function during your period. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, but it does mean that there is that is not a desirable way to live. And there are, at least from what I understand, and you guys are more expert, potential interventions or things you can look for and think about to explain that. It doesn't have to be a fait accompli, like, once you have horrible PMS, you're doomed to live that way for the rest of your life. It's not easy, and our bodies are very complicated, but it's not a static situation.
I think one of the big delays in diagnoses, which we've spoken about before on this podcast, is endometriosis, which causes such significant pain for so many people, with ongoing ramifications as well. But this is usually a delayed diagnosis of, on average about 7 years. So that would be something that I think gets overlooked for sure. I think some of the irregularity and hormone imbalances, most notably polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, is something that's getting much more attention now. And these are all showing up as issues during the menstrual cycle. So we definitely need to be cognizant of that. Again, I feel like data from apps or calendars, but mainly the digital data now is really helping us to hone in on some of this. So, and it's even things like mood changes and whatnot are being tracked now. So I think this is going to be helpful to bring these issues to the forefront.
Mm-hmm. One thing I wanted to comment on about that was something you had said, Rachel, is that it's not normal to not be able to function on your period. I would push back a little bit on that and say that we have been socialized to live in a man's world. Everything that we do in our lives is programmed to this 24-hour circadian rhythm. You wake up, you go to work, and you come home, you go to sleep and do it all over again. And you're expected to show up the same every single day because that's how traditionally men have. And so when you tune into what is characteristic of a follicular phase, this is actually what that looks like, is showing up every day with the same, if not more energy up until ovulation. And then once we hit past ovulation to the luteal phase, there is a tendency to have lower levels of energy and less of a desire to really show up. And that's not because you don't want to. It's literally what the hormone of progesterone is calling us to do, is chill the F out a little bit, baby girl.
That's the medical term.
Yeah. and I think that it's not about not being able to perform. It's about being able to make small adjustments and being able to take it easier when you know that maybe, your progesterone is peaking, or right before your period, you do feel a little bit out of sorts. And so I've noticed a lot of my colleagues in the menstrual space promoting, either menstrual rest or being able to, not call in sick, but take those days off if they do experience such severe symptoms, so that they can charge their batteries to optimize for their next cycle. So, we're not designed to be on all the time in this 24-hour male patriarchal clock that was not written for us. And so I think, just to push back what you were saying, like, we are now, with being able to work flexibly and a lot more women in entrepreneurial roles where they call the shots, there is that flexibility that's starting to form where, and more open conversations as well, to be able to say, hey, I'm on day 26. I am not feeling my hottest. Do you think we can push this meeting till my next week when my period will be over and I'll be, back at it? So I think that, there's something to be said about that as well. And being able to know yourself and know what you're capable of and not push yourself past the limits, because it's when the limits are pushed that a lot of those pains reoccur and a lot of that heaviness reoccurs.
We often talk about anticipatory guidance when it comes to managing some of these symptoms related to menstruation, especially when you are keeping a calendar of some sort. And you can kind of predict when will your mood be maybe a little bit off, and you can prepare yourself and those around you. When might you be in pain? When might you, feel like you need more sleep? And this way you can prepare. Again, approaching things from a more medical standpoint. And I'm all into lifestyle changes and trying to mitigate stress that way. But, dietary manipulation can really help with some of these symptoms.
Absolutely.
Obviously, I prescribe lots of hormonal therapy to manage this, whether you're in favor of that or not. It does work for some people. Pain medication is certainly helpful. Heating pad, exercise. I mean, these things have all been shown to, help with some of the symptoms for some people, especially
magnesium.
Yeah.
And magnesium as well.
And magnesium, absolutely. And that'll also help that premenstrual headache. So for sure, magnesium. But I think people have to take a little bit of a proactive role and realize that there are some mitigating treatment options. And even if the doctor is not the first person that they seek this from, hopefully a friend, a family member, other people who they feel confident enough to speak to about their cycles. I do, just because, we speak so freely about the cycles of or rather the phases of the menstrual cycle. I think we probably should just review that for those who might not be familiar. So obviously feel free if you'd like to go ahead. We usually just divide this.
It's funny. I have a menstrual cycle tattoo on my arm. And
love that.
the only reason I got this is because I had to answer this question so many times, day in and day out. So I figured I should stop wasting so much pen and paper and just get this traveling PowerPoint. So,
give us a tour of your tattoo. And this way, at least everybody will be familiar.
Sure. So this is my menstrual cycle. So asterisk, this is not everyone's menstrual cycle. Mine is 29 days. And so that's how many dots here are indicating the days. And then I have 3 days of bleeding here, which is day 1, starting the menstrual phase. And as we move out of menstruation, comes into the follicular phase, which is when estrogen starts rising. And it's the phase where you're feeling, lighter and freer of all the lining that was just lost, and more energy. And this is then, kind of comes to a peak with your estrogen right before ovulation, or right at ovulation, should I say. And that's indicated by this little kind of like circle egg here. And right as estrogen is decreasing, there's a cross where progesterone starts to rise. And if we look at progesterone, it's kind of like the opposite hormone to estrogen. So instead of go, I can do it, I have endless energy, I only need maybe 6 hours of sleep per night. It's really the pregnancy hormone that's, your body from ovulation to the height of your progesterone thinks it's pregnant. It's really hoping that egg went down, met a sperm, and boom, there's going to be a baby in 9 months. So every single month we kind of trick out our bodies in a way. And it's during this time that that progesterone starts to really rise. And for me personally, it's my sign to say no to more social commitments and focus on more solo work. And I don't have that many bodily changes that happen, maybe a little bit of bloating or a little bit of acne, but that is just me. And then at some point, the body realizes that there was nothing to latch onto within the uterine lining. There was no sperm to meet the egg to be fertilized. And so this beautiful home that was created throughout the month realizes, we don't really have to have this home for anyone. So it starts to make its way and move down. And there's something called prostaglandins that are the reason for more intense menstrual cramps, because it's actually the prostaglandins that are moving a lot of this endometrium down through the vaginal canal and out into a cup, a tampon, or free bleeding for removal. And at that time, progesterone goes down to its lowest point, and so does estrogen, which was also still present in the second phase. My tattoo is not correct, though, because this progesterone line technically should be 40 times as much as the estrogen, but I didn't want to make it so unsightly. But it is really important that we try to maintain high levels of progesterone during our second phase and not have estrogen dominance, because this is actually what is responsible for so many menstrual related discomforts and disorders, whether it's fibroids and the growths that are created from those tumors, or heavy menstrual bleeding and extreme pain. So there's never been an occurrence of like too much progesterone creation. That's like, you've been chilling too much. No one ever says that. It's always the opposite, like too much stress, dietary or life factors that are leading to an imbalance overall.
Well, I think, I was just going to say, you really live and breathe this and have marked it on your arm. So it's impressive.
So before we let you go, just one or two thoughts about what do you see coming in terms of the questions and challenges you'll be asked to help your clients in this space solve? What are some of the themes you see emerging?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I see a lot of corporates who have been heavily involved in the disposable period product industry, shaking a little bit in their boots, being able to really see that reusable period product options actually are standing a chance. And a lot of consumers are navigating themselves towards more clean menstrual care, and having, a place for them too in this wide world of period products. I also foresee that a lot more businesses and people in general working in female health will necessarily have to engage with the menstrual cycle because it is that entry point to health across the life cycle. And without engaging with it, pregnancy doesn't make any sense, menopause doesn't make any sense, sexually transmitted diseases, so much that happens necessarily along the female health life cycle doesn't really make sense if there's not a good, solid, evidence-based understanding of what the menstrual cycle is and what irregularities might look like. So I foresee a lot more mainstreaming of menstruation to everyone's benefit and advantage. And then lastly, and what I'm seeing right now around language is like this constant fight between what we should be calling the people who menstruate. So on one hand, it's, women, women, women. No, we can't just say women because what about all the other people who menstruate? Okay, then we just say people who menstruate. And so I think there's problems with both of these approaches. Yes, we have to be inclusive and not just say women, but we also can't isolate women from the very experience that makes them feel so close to their womanhood or, so close to their femininity. So I keep trying to add my thoughts to LinkedIn conversations around inclusivity to say, hey, let's just say women and people who menstruate. Done deal. We don't have to.
That's everybody.
It's everybody. Inclusive. Women are happy. People who menstruate are happy. Let's move on to the actual issues instead of, wordsmithing ourselves into a hole.
I think that's a perfect place to stop, and we'll call that one a wrap. But thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast at businessofthev.com for the latest trends and trendsetters in women's health and business.